As this world is torn asunder.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are going back to Dragon Age Inquisition. Ladies and gentlemen, this series is a roller coaster ride for me, and we started at the peak, in my humble opinion. We started at the peak with Dragon Age Origins. We went down a peg with Dragon Age 2, although I still have some love for that game. And then Dragon Age Inquisition, the one we're sitting down to talk about today, is a divisive one. For many people, it holds some of the best character-centric moments in the entire series. For others, it's a reminder of how side content and bloat can destroy an otherwise excellent video games. For some, it's where they discovered their love of MMOs, and much, much more. There's a lot to be said about Dragon Age Inquisition, and there's a great reason to be talking about it now because Veilguard is arriving soon, and if you know even a little bit about Inquisition, you know this is the direct sequel to that story and everything that its Trespasser DLC set up. So what I want to do today was sit down, talk about playing it in 2024, what the game offers, what it does right, what it does wrong, the story, and walk you down a similar journey I went through with this series where I was a big hater of Inquisition. I remember being so salty when the game came out and how disappointed I was with its gameplay loop in particular, and I slandered the game for years until Dragon Age YouTubers just urged me on to tell me to go try it again with all the DLC. And when I went back, I won't say I loved it, but I learned to appreciate it, and as I think more back on it, my opinion of it does grow in a more positive way. But that's because you forget just how few and far between those great moments are when it's full of MMO fetch quests. So there's much to be said about Dragon Age Inquisition, but it's a good time to be talking about it, so thank you for being here, and let's get into it. If you're new here and you're into nostalgic and retrospective content, consider subscribing, and no doubt, there'll be more Dragon Age videos on the way. I am reviewing Veilguard, if anyone's curious for my take on that. It'll be out on Monday on my Mr. Matty Plays channel. With that, let's get into it, starting off with the narrative, because I think that is truly the highlight of this game. Now, one thing that's really impressive about Dragon Age Inquisition is how they utilize Dragon Age Keep. For those who don't pay attention to the BioWare games, they allow you to bring in choices from your old games into the next one, and that's what's led to them having such a dedicated, passionate gaming community. Even when many people think they're at their worst right now, it's because you're invested in that journey. You got to see where it's going, and it's why even some of the most die-hard Dragon Age fans have turned their backs on Veilguard because only 3 choices are carrying over into that game. Whereas Inquisition, it's an open season, man. It's all the choices in Origins. It's the choices in 2. You get to see your version of Hawk. And that is what really elevates the starting cast of characters. Because in Inquisition, the pre-established characters like a Liliana or a Derek are just much more interesting than the original characters this game puts forward to you relatively immediately, like a Josephine or a Sarah. I apologize, by the way, if you are a Sarah lover or a Josephine lover. I did romance Sarah in my last playthrough, so don't come for me. I'm just trying to be objective here about what these characters offer. That's not to say that original characters in Inquisition are bad by any stretch of the imagination. I look at characters like Iron Bull, Blackwall, Dorian, Solus, who just really thrive and turn this game into a fantastic blend of old and new when you toss in other mainstays like Cassandra, who was at the heart of Dragon Age 2's plot. But still, seeing a character who I really care about, like Liliana, rise up from a rogue you meet in a bar in Origins to someone who controls the information network in Inquisition, and then to see her potentially even taking over the Chantry in Trespasser is single-handedly one of the most fascinating arcs to see a character go on, and that's what Inquisition does best. But it's also, again, back to those keep choices. You can see Loghain from Origins, the game behind me, start talking about the hero of Ferelden in a little side conversation. Morgan and Flemeth will stand toe-to-toe over Morgan's son that was had with your character. You get to watch Hawk enter the fray. These are highlights that I think many people, myself included, are guilty of forgetting because the main conversation of this game is centralized around the hinterland problems, and I think there is a way to navigate it, and it still does exist for the game. But yeah, it's what everyone thinks of when they think of Inquisition, and it's such a shame because it does have brilliant character moments. And the dialogue has held up really well, like much better than I recalled, with nuance and how characters approve and disapprove slightly or extremely with much of what you say. The best thing I can really say about this game is it's always putting choice in your hands. Whether it's little things like how a character feels about something you say, giving them more personality, more believability in them being real, all the way to you sitting atop your throne and calling shots on what's going to happen to people and how it's going to influence the world around you. This game always loves putting choice in your hands. However, it does open up a little bit slowly, and you wouldn't be blamed for thinking it's a little boring at first, because the game truly doesn't get its legs until you get to Skyhold. Once you get to Skyhold and you become the Inquisitor, the hero of Andraste, then things do take off. But it takes a little bit getting into that. But when they start handing that ball over to you after every mission, just going around Skyhold, talking to everybody, getting some thoughts on what you've done so far as a character, having that back and forth, watching them grow, watching them interact with other party members, it's brilliant. It is literally the best part of Inquisition. The defining term I would give Inquisition is hybrid, not just in its gameplay, but how it approaches the tone of Dragon Age. It still is a far cry away from what Origins does in the terms of being a side-to-side comparison of Lord of the Rings, or obviously the way the series was first introduced is their own Baldur's Gate again. In fact, Origins was supposed to be Baldur's Gate. So yeah, like you can feel that inspiration with where it started and where it ends up. It is a little more lighter in tone, but I feel like Dragon Age Inquisition, with, like I mentioned, that Flemeth and Morgan interaction, does have its dark moments, its heartfelt moments where you go, that was one choice I made with a character, like one bit of compassion, and look how far it carried. That is the magic that makes this series go round. Really any BioWare series go round, but especially Dragon Age. Now, my problem with the writing in Inquisition has always been the amount of sub-factions this game introduces. Like, you have Red Templars, you have Templars. Okay, I mean, there is a minor difference between these two that feels major in the terms of the story. There's also 4 dominant races, each with their own extremely rich history, and you're exploring, in particular, one rich history with the elves and their multiple gods. And this leads to what I think is a lot of conversations feeling like word salad, and that's coming from me who's been playing Dragon Age since the series first came to be. I'd like to say I study up on this franchise, where you just assume who someone is based on their title rather than how the game actually informs you. And so sometimes I do feel the dialogue goes a little right over your head, unless you're like fully immersed, you've played thousands of hours of this thing. I feel like I've put the work in, and there's just times I'm like, I don't even remember what that means. And so it gets a little in the weeds sometimes too much, which is what I think a lot of game developers fall prey to. But Dragon Age Inquisition especially, and if you're hopping in here and this is like your first Dragon Age game, first off, a little bit of dangerous territory, I think, because of just how much your playthrough can be influenced through Origins and 2 and just seeing how things evolve in Inquisition. But if you're a first timer hopping into this, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of stuff just does not process for you, unfortunately. But one thing that Inquisition was really lacking was a strong main villain. And really, I feel like it's been since Origins that Dragon Age has lacked a really good main villain, because Loghain does have that moment where you hate him. You hate what he did. At least that's how I felt during the Battle of Ostagar, where he turns his back on Caitlyn. Like, that hurt, man. That is like a scene that is stained in my head for just how it made me feel when I was like in, I think, 9th grade playing this game for the first time. Just such a core gaming moment for me. Or the Arashok in Dragon Age 2. So well written, so brooding, so intimidating, despite the Qunari just slowly growing in a pocket of Kirkwall. You could feel they're an imminent threat. It's a powder keg that's about to blow. And that made him really captivating. Whereas Corypheus is just not on screen enough, and when he is on screen, he doesn't do or say anything interesting enough and establish a personal connection enough with you for him to matter. Now, the DLC saves this, right? Because now when you play Inquisition, based on the marketing of Dreadwolf, now Veilguard, you know that the main villain of this series moving into the next game is Solas. So you keep a closer eye on him. But I always remember playing the game as you would and just picking your favorites. Solas was not in my wheelhouse of favorites. I was like, whatever. And I moved on, and then all of a sudden the ending hits. He's kind of walking away all ominously. I'm like, all right, cool, bro. See you later, whatever you're up to. Only to realize this dude becomes the main villain. So then in my subsequent playthrough, it's like, okay, I'm getting a little bit closer to Solas. I need to know what's going on here with him. Like, let's get a little bit deeper into his villain arc. And in turn, the focus is less on Corypheus as a player, even if the game wants you to focus on Corypheus more, and it's much more on Solas, because you want to learn everything about this anti-hero, if you will. Like, he seems like a good guy. Why is he? Who is he? Why is he doing what he's doing? that's where a lot of the interest lies. And if you approach the game like that, suddenly you don't have a villain issue any longer that you did have at launch. But it's really hard to continue talking about Dragon Age's story without getting into the war table, because the war table is what just deeply intertwines itself with the narrative, because it's so connected to the gameplay, where it's going to send you out to these massive hub areas that, by the way, you cannot sprint in. What were we thinking making them so big and all you can do is just do the classic open world jog out there? I'm just like, man, this hurts. Like, why isn't there a sprint button? And it blows my mind that BioWare has so many times now said, yeah, we did a Mass Effect Legendary Edition, but we won't do one for Dragon Age. I'm like, Mass Effect needed less work. Like, Mass Effect is still the peak of trilogy gaming, in my opinion. It has yet to be topped. Dragon Age has problems that work backwards, where I think that Origins you just re-release. Whereas something like Inquisition, the war table currency, no sprinting, like boom, 2 easy quality of life fixes right there that make this game infinitely better. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that. I'm like, do you hate money? Are you allergic to money? Are you okay? You can make a lot of this. Why don't you do this? Blows my mind. But nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, you can't talk about the story any longer without getting into that war table. So for those unfamiliar, the war table is this system in Dragon Age that's really cool, because at the center of the story is politics. And this game is at its best when it's letting you politic it up. Like in the quest line Wicked Eyes and Wicked Hearts, you just get to go around Orlais and just wheel and deal, schmooze people, and just influence the actual politics of the world around you, the way people are behaving, the like changes to entire cultures. Like, it just feels like you're playing with house money, because you can silver tongue your way into so many different situations. And I just love that in games like Dragon Age, where they just totally lean on dialogue as a gameplay mechanic, because it works. It's super effective. Now, this war table demands a power currency, which takes you away from the main story that I'm talking about to go and do fetch quests to net said power. So you'll kill 5 enemies, or you'll collect X of this, or you'll help someone out over here. And some of these quests are just gonna feed you power. And in particular, when you're in the hinterlands and you're just waiting for that list of objectives to end, you continue to go and continue to go and continue to go. And suddenly, in my first playthrough, you spent like 30 hours in the hinterlands as it continues to expand more and more. It is a black hole that will absorb you and not let go if you're not aware of what this will offer you. And to me, at least, it's very little. You'll just go in there and it'll throw at you just bottom of the barrel, thoughtless fetch quests, which is why this game was deemed a single player MMO by many players. Because it's just that simple, whatever, turn off your brain content, which is so weird because the combat can be very engaging and the storyline can be very good. And if this whole framework just didn't exist, it would be in a whole different position as a game and how it was received, which I guess isn't saying much. It did win Game of the Year, but I always say cap on that, because 2014, awful year for gaming, and to me, a bit of a gimme award. But nonetheless, when you're farming this power, it's keeping you away from missions like fighting off a nightmare in the Fade, investigating the mystery of Red Lyrium, playing politics in Orlais. There's just all these moments that are so good in Inquisition's main story if you look at them in a vacuum. And that's why, as you get further away from Inquisition, you go more and more, I like it, but then you pick it up and you realize how much gameplay, this vast ocean of content, exists between you and your next interesting point in the game. Don't get me wrong, the combat can carry a lot of this because the builds are great, whether you're an assassin or a knight enchanter or a two-handed champion that's focusing on counter strikes. Like, there is a lot here for you to build, not only for yourself, but your teammates. And unlike in Veilguard, you can control your teammates. Here in Inquisition, you can strategize more, and it is a hybrid between what Dragon Age Origins offers and Dragon Age 2 offers, where Origins was purely tactics, right? And then you have Dragon Age 2, which was purely action. And this game allows you to pause the action, send out commands, strategize how you want to go about things. You can play this like a straight up action game, and there are stretches where you're going to want to do that. It's a game that I've never been brave enough to do nightmare difficulty on. It might be because I'm having a skill issue with build crafting. I only say that because I find enemies in this game, even with I think are pretty good builds, to be very spongy. And unless I'm just repeating the same combos over and over and over and over, and the game gets redundant and boring. Otherwise, though, I feel like the enemies in this game are a little too spongy, and that can stretch out combat and not make you feel as powerful, which is something I feel like Dragon Age has struggled with a lot. Like usually there's a clear class in this series that's just head and shoulders above the rest. Like, for example, in Dragon Age 2, it's the mage. It's just way better than anything else, in my opinion. But it's still fun to play, and there's DLC that incentivizes you to heavily engage in the combat, and I don't think Inquisition can be talked about without assuming that you are going to be playing its DLC as well. And one of them that I really love is The Descent. There is also the Jaws of Hakan, but to me, that's just more Inquisition more of the things you may or may not like about it, as in more open zones, more fetch quests, but also more story stuff that can be good between those fetch quests. For me, it's my least favorite of the bunch. My second favorite of the bunch is The Descent, though there are some days I absolutely love it. It just has that Dragon Age Origins vibe. It has the deep roads, it focuses on dwarven lore and expands your knowledge of the Titans. You get to meet Volta and learn more about her character, and just explores that alongside fighting the Darkspawn again. I felt like, again, I was in Orzammar, in Origins again. It was just a beautiful thing. So there was a little bit of nostalgia there, no doubt about it, but I thought the story there was great. It was bite-sized enough, and it focused a lot on the combat. So if you like the combat in Inquisition, you're gonna love your time with The Descent, because there's a lot of fighting. It is definitely very dungeon crawly. There are some puzzles that'll kind of vary it up from time to time. That's also something I think that's a little strange this game does, is it'll throw puzzles your way that are, I don't think, very great. And in particular, Trespasser does that, and I don't like the puzzles in that whatsoever. Not just because, oh, I'm getting stumped, but it's just, it's a speed bump to what you're really there for. Especially in such an important narrative like Trespasser, I think anything getting in the way of that is just not a good call at all. But anyway, let's talk about Trespasser, because that's the real reason you're here. It is the DLC that made Veilguard what it is, where they're marketing it around Solus. That's why the game was originally called Dreadwolf, right? This is the main villain of the game. And if you are interested in Veilguard, this is what you must watch. This is what you must play. You have to do this to understand what's going to be happening in that game, because this is the setup. I remember asking so much of my community at the time when I first replayed this game, why are people excited for the next Dragon Age? Inquisition was terrible. And they're like, Trespasser, because it sets up the next stage. It gets people hungry. And it does just that. You get an idea behind Solus's reasoning for why he disappeared at the end of the game. But also, it's choices you make. What's going to happen with the Inquisition? Your job is done by this point in the game. So do you dissolve this Inquisition? Do you give it over to the Chantry? What do you do with the Inquisition? What's your choice there? Again, when they're letting you play with that power, there's a lot of good stuff here. There's also a lot of politicking again, especially in the opening going. There's new choices that allow you to make class-specific dialogue choice options. So there's a lot of good stuff packed in here, but it's really the Solus DLC. And what you're playing it for specifically is that final scene. And especially if you have Romance Solus, you're definitely going to want to know what's going on here, because that adds a whole new layer to Dragon Age the Veilguard, which they showed in the Keep. You are able to bring over if you romance Solus or not, and what impact that will have. So yes, in 2024, Dragon Age Inquisition is a lot of what I would define the rest of the Dragon Age series. It's a war of attrition. Outside of Origins, for me personally, it's really a series about, can I outlast its flaws for long enough to enjoy the storytelling here? And that means in Dragon Age 2, can I outlast the repetitive environments and sometimes repetitive gameplay to get to the character interactions, to see the story and the choices, that sort of stuff. Same thing with Inquisition. Can I outlast the war table? Can I outlast the fetch quests in the hinterlands to get to those main story missions that are so good? Can I outlast it enough to get 50 hours into a playthrough to then reach the DLC? Can I outlast all of that? That is the question that you have to ask yourself if it's worth it or not. You'll only find out by playing. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're on to Veilguard soon. Again, my review will be up on my Mr. Matty channel over on Monday. So I look forward to seeing you there for my thoughts on the game. But otherwise, let me know what you think of Dragon Age Inquisition down below. Fire away. With that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.